podcast role. Welcome in.
You're listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast, a proud member of the Podcast Roll Network. Hello, Jamie.
Hello, Peter. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. Actually, I'm pretty jazzed because I have a cousin. Her name is Ellen. Ellen reached out to me, I don't know, a few weeks ago to say, hey, we have a cousin. His name is Alan, and he's an artist. And did you know him? And I didn't. And that's because of family dynamics and things like that and tragedies that happen. And so I learned about this cousin. I go to this gallery in Seattle that he's got. The reason why Ellen got in touch with me was like, our artist cousin has some pieces being shown at this gallery.
Oh,
so
cool.
Yeah, so I went over to the gallery yesterday. I was blown away by how talented he is. I'm like, oh my gosh. And so I go in and I'm trying to tell the gallery owner, who seemed interested, but I think was like sizing me up and is this guy going to buy any art? You know?
This person's not buying.
That's right. I was like, there's this one piece. He's like, I'm not inclined to bring that one out right now. I'm like, yeah, totally. Because you can tell by how I'm dressed, I can't afford it. But but here's the thing. It's like my grandmother had two siblings, and one of her siblings, her name was Lee, and Lee's son is Alan. So, I mean, it is my father's first cousin. I mean, it doesn't get any closer than that.
Yeah.
And for me, my first cousin once removed. And as I'm looking at his pieces, I'm remarking to myself, my gosh, I mean, it's like a realism. And this one piece I was looking at was like the undercarriage of a bridge. And so it's sort of patinaed and it's rusting and it's just gorgeous. Mm. And I'm thinking to myself, my God, that takes so much time to create something that beautiful. It must have taken forever to conceive it, to draw it, to do some initial drafts, to learn, to move forward, to do it. And, I'm always thinking about schools when I'm doing this and always trying to draw my own sort of conclusions and analogies. And like this painting and the process is a metaphor for schools, that it takes time to get something so beautiful. And I tell you that story because our guest today, Mike Miles, is superintendent in Houston Independent School District. And he really challenged that notion that school improvement takes a long time. I mean, in fact, he kind of thinks that significant school improvement doesn't have to take several years. And I'm still struggling with it a little bit. I am really curious to hear what people think about that conversation when they listen here in a minute. And then when we come back on the other side, I think it would be something I'd like to explore with you a little bit more. So before we get in there, because I realize you've been so patiently just sort of like listening to my story.
Listening to the undercarriage story.
Any thoughts about it's just amazing. I can't believe that this cousin I didn't really know has created something so beautiful. And yeah, I stand in awe of it. I'm like, wow, so cool.
Once again, I can relate in this way. I'll tell a story that's only sort of connected to that idea. I had a cousin on American Idol this season.
Amazing.
And there's an Alman San on American Idol. This is a cousin, again, that I don't know. I've met his father, but it was an offshoot of the family that was disconnected and only reconnected, this is relatively recently, being within the last 10 years or so. They live in El Paso, which is where my grandfather's from. That's the arm of the family that they're connected to. But I don't know this kid. And they're like, oh, our cousin's on American Idol. And I'm like, I feel funny calling him my cousin. Yes, literally he is.
I was going to say, but embrace it, man. I'm like, Alan Gorman is my cousin. Look at this amazing work.
Funny. I feel so kind of like, I feel guilty saying I don't want to take any glory from his amazing performance. I think he's amazing. He and his sister play together and they write their own songs and they're amazing.
Good. So it wasn't just that he was on American Idol and they're like, thanks for auditioning. You waited in line for 4 hours and have a good life. He actually is on American Idol.
He made it to the top 15. Yeah, he made it.
So cool.
He made it relatively far. I think this now you'll get a sense of my connection to American Idol. I'm like, I don't think he made it to the top 10. But I can't remember. But our whole family was like, oh, he's in them. Let's vote for him. Let's vote for him. And I was like, oh, y'all don't even know this kid.
It's family. Didn't you tell me over and over from seasons 2 through 4 of this podcast that, you know what? It's not about you. It's about
It isn't about me. It is not. But I also don't want to do that. I don't want to be disingenuous and think like I am deeply connected to this amazing person because besides our last names, there is.
It's hilarious. I say embrace it. I say embrace it. Okay, so why don't we go into our conversation? And but before we do that, we do have a sponsor each week. Mike Miles, he's not our sponsor. IXL is our sponsor. But Mike, he really showed us that systemic transformation doesn't have to take years. That's what he's going to talk about. And you'll hear us talk about that. He says what you need is a clear playbook. And IXL helps you do that as well. So it will help you build that organizational coherence. And it is research proven, and it is in the top 96 of the top 100 school districts. And so if you want to drive historic gains and empower your teachers to focus on what matters most, visit IXL.com/imperfect today to learn more. You're listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. I'm Peter Stiepelman.
And I'm Jamie Almanzan, and we'll see you on the other side.
Today on An Imperfect Leader, my guest is Mike Miles, Superintendent of the Houston, Texas Public Schools. And Mike, he is a lifelong public servant whose career spans the military, diplomacy, and then more than 3 decades in education. A former superintendent in both Dallas and Colorado Springs, Mike is known for driving high-performance cultures and rethinking how schools prepare students for the future. Mike, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Yeah, good to be here. Thank you, Peter.
I'm so happy to spend some time with you. And I recently saw a post of you with my friend Ironetta Wright, which tells me that we're already friends, because if you know Ironetta, you're good people. If it's okay, I'd like to start with your work in Houston. Leading a metropolitan district is often seen as legacy building. And what I mean by that is it's not often that a current leader will immediately see the positive ripple effects that their actions take. And it's usually the next leader and the leader after that, as long as they stay the course. And I really believe that change, real change in my mind, is incremental. And I believe that. But I've actually gotten to consider the possibility that transformation can be realized quickly after seeing a lot of what you've been doing in Houston. For example, under your leadership in Houston ISD, you've seen historic transformation, including the elimination of, I'll say campuses that are rated F, because when I say F rated, it sounds like I'm cursing you out or something. Campuses that are rated F in just 2 years, and that is pretty amazing. And so my question for you is, what do you believe is the most important cultural shift that is required to achieve that kind of rapid improvement in instructional excellence?
A couple of things. Yes, we've had the largest, fastest transformation of any large urban district in the history of Texas and probably the United States. And we've shown that it doesn't have to take several years. We went from 121 D and F rated campuses, 56 F rated campuses, 121 D and F. And we got that down to 16 D campuses, D rated campuses in just 2 years, 0 Fs. But on the other end, we went from 93 A and B rated campuses to 197 in 2 years. We're nearing the end of our 3rd year, and we think we're going to get gains again. And I can give you all kinds of data, but we've been doing it. The key is systemic change. And so when you started, you said often the real success is not seen for a year. And I think that's probably correct, especially if you're changing the system. So we've been doing that in short order here in Houston, but I think the real gains, the real success of that will be to see the system of public education, at least in Houston, changed. And you won't see that for probably a few years, at least confirm that it is actually systemic and not transitory. But you touched on another, like how, and you asked me about culture. And you named one of the 3 big pieces of systemic change I think is necessary, and one is culture. And I would say we have been trying and are creating what's known as a high performance culture. And the key thing about that is we've changed the paradigm on what high performance culture means and how you attain it. I happen to have had good experiences in different fields on what a high performance culture is in the military, in the State Department. And one of the things that those organizations and businesses, anywhere you think about, where they have an elite organization with high performing members and the organization's high performing, they have a culture of this is how we do it here. And what that means is they set high expectations and they have high expectations for how people perform and how people behave. And it's around a set of values and beliefs around how the organization should work and attain high outcomes.
I recently read Colin Powell's book on leadership, and two things stuck out to me. One is reminding people that bad news doesn't get better with time. And sort of an extension of that is the value and importance of reflecting on what went well and what didn't go so well. And it sort of was a driving force around this podcast around doing after action reviews, that this isn't a character assessment. It's not a gotcha. It's how can we become better? How do we learn from our past experiences to make better decisions in the future? And I sense that's kind of what you're talking about in terms of a culture of, if we're a learning institution as schools are, then how do we adopt a learning mentality to learn from what we've done and do better next time?
Yeah, that's part of it. That's the continuous improvement part of cultures is something we also strive for. But the reason why I believe we've been able to move quickly is that organizational coherence. In other words, we all have the same playbook and we have the same expectations.
You have a
And
shared image of what success looks like.
Yes, and shared accountability from the superintendent all the way through to other staff members, but superintendent, chief of schools, executive directors, principals, teachers, other staff members, we all have the same image and some degree of accountability for accomplishing the goals. And accountability is real, and we don't necessarily ask for buy-in. We ask for input, and that's two different things.
There was a
That's why.
superintendent I met, Avis Williams. She was in New Orleans for a time, and she said to me, I don't ask people for buy-in, I ask them for commitment, because if you can buy in, you can be bought out. And I went, oh, I like that. That is great.
Very similar. We ask for you to join the organization, and that's the moment of choice for you. But we explain our employee value proposition, what we're about, how we operate, what you're going to gain from that, the highest pay, the best professional development. So it's a proposition, and we ask you to choose. That's when we ask you to buy in. But after that, this is how we do it here.
Yeah.
We've told you how it is, and if you don't agree, that's okay. Don't get angry. Just don't come here.
I'd like to ask you a question, an extension of system building, because I was interested in your now segments. You ride in the car, you answer questions, you're heading towards a building. First of all, I think it shows you as a human-centered leader who understands that a superintendent's presence in schools is highly valued. And then you have so many schools, and so there's only one of you. And so you have found a way to show others that you are in schools regularly, because people write their own scripts. When I was superintendent of a smaller district, although 20,000 kids is not so tiny, but yet people would say, well, we don't see you. And I said, I've been in schools all week, but we don't know that because there are so many. And so I thought to myself, like, oh man, I should have been doing these videos, these now segments. But I watched one where you mentioned how the world is changing quickly and with AI and new technologies. And I really appreciated your focus on course offerings at the middle school, particularly like CTE and things like that. And I attended an ASA session in Nashville that was around middle school literacy, but they were talking about how they began to implement CTE at the middle school level to really engage kids around purposeful reading. And so I was wondering if you would take just a moment to kind of describe how your team is tailoring these CTE offerings for middle school with a systems thinking mentality of, if you just offered it at high school, then kids don't have an opportunity to grow into these or to aspire to things that they might want to pursue, that kind of pathway. And so it was about, I guess, making sure they have the skills for these high demand pathways. Would you talk a little bit about that building? Because it sounds very intentional.
Yes. However, I'm going to reframe it a little bit. So we are expanding and upgrading our career tech ed courses, our programs of study. So that is happening. We are, instead of cosmetology, we have drones and using drones. Instead of just computer programming, we now have cybersecurity. We have upgraded health sciences. We have welding, but with augmented 3D welding and laser welding and things like, so we are taking those programs of study and improving them. And yes, we're introducing more and more of our middle schoolers to those. But the real key for the future and what we're doing that will help students in the high school is in 3 through 8. We have started and we are now doubling down on what I call year 2030, year 2035 competencies. And that is information literacy, problem solving, decision making, critical thinking, leadership, learning how to learn, working in teams, having perspective.
These are all the things that AI can't do. These are very human.
So you hit it on the head, Peter. What is the human competitive advantage 5 years from now? What is our competitive advantage? And I just named a lot of those: empathy, working in teams, decision making, leadership. So if we want to prepare our kids for a different world and workplace, you can't just do CTE and high school. That's important, but that's not enough. What is our responsibility to our students to prepare them for a different world and workplace, one, like you just said, where many of the skills AI will be able to do, but many human skills and competitive advantage the kids will need. The industries that businesses have been talking about soft skills for a long time. This just makes it more clear what kids should know and be able to do. Anyway, we're the only district in America, I think, that has Art of Thinking, which is information literacy, problem solving, critical thinking as a core class for 130 schools, 3 times a week, 90 minutes each time. And we've been doing it for 3 years, 3rd through 10th grade. It's called Art of Thinking. We don't get any state points for it or anything. We just think it's good for kids. And now people can see the value of it even more. And then we've had our NES, New Education System schools, also try to grow the experiences of kids. So next year, we start the next iteration of NES, which is Future 2. So Future 2 will have core content in the morning, reading, writing, math, science, and art of thinking, which has been a core subject for us. In the afternoon, they will have different experiences and activities that reinforce decision-making, leadership, working in teams, growing your perspective, empathy, working in teams, learning how to learn. All of those things that we just mentioned, they're going to do all afternoon. And there's also workshops in the after school if they need to. For example, there are requirements to play a musical instrument, to be in a team sport. If they already have those requirements checked off, that's fine. If they don't, we will do that for them after school.
So this becomes sort of part of one's profile or graduate, that they have these skills that we can say with integrity. You didn't just earn a high school diploma, you actually earned recognition that you are, predictably going to be successful in life.
Absolutely. In fact, can't get promoted. We have these things called dyad. So 3rd and 4th grade is a dyad. You can't be promoted to the next dyad without completing these activities and we use a rubric. So it's not
a subjective. Yeah.
They have to learn decision-making, leadership skills, etc.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you reframed it, Mike, because truly what I hear you saying is in a traditional school system, CTE at the high school, for example, is really an introduction to careers. And what you're really speaking to is a system-wide integration so that these really important skills are a part of what a graduate can expect. And I guess for leaving each dyad, the promise we make to parents in Houston is you can expect that when your child leaves this dyad, they have these skills to be able to do the next one.
That's right. And the premise is career tech ed is important and skills are important, but half of them won't be around in 5 years, maybe 8 years. So what's more important are these other skill sets that will allow a student to learn quickly a new skill, something that, I don't know, maybe hologram technology will balloon and kids will need that skill set, or some kids will want that skill set. And our premise is if you learn these other things like working together, empathy, critical thinking, fallacies of logic, those sorts of things, you're going to be better prepared to change with the changing world.
I love it. Our guest today is Mike Miles, a lifelong public servant and educator who's led major school systems and is known for rethinking how schools prepare students for the future. We've obviously been talking about that until this point. He currently serves as the Superintendent of Houston ISD in Houston, Texas. Like in the leadership model that I use to advise others, there's a dimension. It's called the leader's learning work. And inside that dimension are a number of terms, including one that we've been talking about, applying systems and design thinking. And one habit of systems thinking I noticed in your work in Houston is how systems thinkers make meaningful connections between and among systems. For example, you've engaged over 60 different organizations, including faith-based groups, businesses, philanthropic partners, all to support the Houston Promise. And so would you take a moment first, just briefly, what is the Houston Promise? And then how do you ensure that these external partners are really aligned? And you talked about coherence, so I imagine that's going to play a part in your answer, but that is like, in terms of how do you get alignment beyond the extras of backpack supplies, things like that?
Yeah. The Houston Promise is a promise we made a year ago when we discovered that we only had 16 D rated schools and we had 52 C rated schools. This is out of 273. We set a big goal, a promise, if you will. And it's not just a pipe dream because we had already gotten so many more A and B schools. For every school to be only A and B rated schools in 2 more years. So at the end of this year and then the end of next year is the deadline. And so hopefully we can cut down on the number of C and D rated schools this year, and that'll be in a couple months, we'll know. And then the rest of them the following year. That's the Houston Promise. And we engage the community to adopt schools, to support schools that were C and D rated so that they could give just an extra push. And one of the ways we try to get people aligned is to be clear about the vision of what we're trying to do. And that's just one part, right? The A and B rated, the Houston Promise. I haven't seen any research that says that math and reading at grade level is not going to be important in the year 2030, year 2035. In fact, it's even more important now. Yes, I talked about those other skills, but math and reading is still going to be key. In fact, today, if you graduate without being able to read at grade level, you're at a huge disadvantage. In 5 years, it'll be even bigger disadvantage, I believe. Now, some down 20 years, 30 years from now, who knows? But for now, that's still key. So getting kids to read and write and do math at grade level, which is mostly what the A and B rating is about, and college and career readiness at the high school level, that's important. So we talk about our vision. We talk about future too. We talk about the future a lot with the community, different groups. And here's where I would put a footnote on the question you had, and that is, we're okay with any sort of support they can give. Good Reason Houston, and some of the Good Reason Houston is an advocacy organization that supports all of the districts in that greater Houston area. They use a lot of data. They provide a lot of support. We expect greater support from them, so to speak, than a faith-based group that if all they do is provide coffee for teachers on Friday or extra gifts for kids or backpacks for kids, we're happy with that 100%. The philanthropists, we ask to be more to help on specific projects. And Houston is one of the most philanthropic cities. And so that sort of alignment is important because we want them to support the things that we're doing. And so far, they've responded very well. But most of that comes from outlining a clear vision and then having some success with that. I think in America, the philanthropic community has kind of dropped back a little bit because we have failed as a education system writ large. And people are kind of tired of throwing good money after bad and not seeing a lot of success. So anyway, that's the goal.
I appreciate it. And I appreciate the clarification on, of course, school districts are going to welcome the contributions, whether it's coffee on a Friday or backpacks or free haircuts and those types of things. What I interpreted when I was reading and following you a bit was it's a yes and. The philanthropic community, one of the things that they do well is that they have an expectation that you're going to be able to back up that their contribution has yielded the kinds of results that you had expected to see. And I think seeing more of that in terms of the partnership holds us accountable to making the kinds of results that we claim to be able to do. That's where I see the difference between potentially the extras.
Yeah, there's also one other thing that the profession has done, and that is sometimes they chase money or donations instead of chasing those that fit their vision and mission.
Yes. And then all of a sudden we do 1,000 things poorly
Yes.
as opposed. Yeah. That is
And
such a good piece of advice.
We don't do that here in Houston. We like money and resources, but it has to fit what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
And because of the success, we've had a community that responds in that way. They will support the things that we've been trying to do because they see it working.
Mike, I'd like to ask you a question that I ask every guest who comes on the podcast. How does the term an imperfect leader resonate for you?
Look, I'm an old guy. I've been a leader for a long time, and there is a never ending, it's a journey and it never ends to grow. That's why I was really like your title and just the concept that leaders who take on challenges, I mean, you grow from learning from mistakes. And so that makes you stronger. But if you're going to go after challenges, you're always going to learn, because education is a complex business, because it's a human business and all of us are fallible. So it's going to be a long journey, and it's not done. As old as I am, it's still not done. We'll never be done.
Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being, and I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of An Imperfect Leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, they shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class, and the kid next to him sort of shoved him and goes, "Texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class." I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. I want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. Minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR. So I want to talk a minute about the Mosaic Project. It is one of our favorite organizations and has over 25 years of experience empowering students to really celebrate differences, communicate assertively, and resolve conflict peacefully at their outdoor school. I happen to have experience being part of the Mosaic Project, and so I can absolutely tell you it's an amazing organization. Their innovative SEL curriculum is now available to our Imperfect Leader audience. And so you can get a 10% discount through their new documentary film-based Mosaic Classroom project. So just let the people know during your onboarding process to receive that 10% discount is to just mention An Imperfect Leader. Learn more about the Mosaic Project at mosaicproject.org.
When leaders think in systems, they think differently. They see the big picture, making decisions that create coherence and strengthen communication across their teams. They build adaptability, flexibility, and engagement. Every day, school leaders face complex challenges, from student engagement to staff alignment. What if your team could see those challenges as part of a bigger picture? That's what happens when you think in systems. It's how leaders turn complexity into connection and challenges into opportunities for growth. At the Waters Center for Systems Thinking, we help educators and organizations build this capacity, developing the habits and tools that turn vision into action. Think differently, think in systems. Sign up for our webinars, free resources, or a consultation by visiting our website, which you can find in the show notes.
We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. And my guest is Mike Miles, a lifelong public servant who's the superintendent of Houston ISD and whose career spans the military, diplomacy, and more than 3 decades in education. And in this segment, like we do each week, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision that they made, and then we ask, what'd you learn about it? Mike, what happened?
Well, I could take several examples, but one of the more recent ones is the way I approached hiring staff in Houston. So my team and I came in June. School is going to start August 12th to June 1st. And that year before my team got here, there was 588 teacher vacancies at the start of the school year. Now, there's 11,000 teachers, but even with 11,000, that's a lot of vacancies. And most urban districts were struggling. But I knew that we needed to address that and we needed to bring that down. So one of the goals, apart from all the other things we were doing, was to get our vacancies down to zero or as close to zero as we could, but also to hire well. In other words, I asked the principals to do performance interviews, not just look at resumes. So we set this goal. Again, there were a lot of other things going on, but this is one of the more important ones, right? Because we have to get there. And in June, by that point, there's still, I think, 600 vacancies. That's not crazy. That's not good, but
No, but it's 5% of your teaching staff. And I imagine some of them are in particularly difficult areas to fill, special education, English learner, teacher, those types of positions. And then you're trying to make class lists and try to fill kids' courses. And you can't do that if there isn't a teacher there. And then relying on long-term substitutes is never a viable option, although it's something that is done. So my gosh.
Yeah, I mean, listeners can tell you've been a superintendent because that's exactly the thing, right?
Yeah.
So over the summer we had to hire all these people, and so I gave them the goal. HR did their work, and it did not go well at all, and we got to zero vacancies, but we got there because the principals and the HR team turned it into a compliance exercise. It's okay, let's get to zero vacancy. That wasn't the real point. The real point is to have effective teachers, or at least people who had the potential to be effective. So new teachers who had the potential and willingness to do what it really takes. But it was just because there was so much bureaucratic processes and little capacity about what effective meant. So like, what does a high performing teacher look like? What do they do? And I had underestimated that. I had just really didn't think that through because the principals were not instructional leaders. And I was asking them to do performance interviews. Okay, what would that look like? And unlike many of the other things we did, we did not script the move.
I was about to ask you. So when I think about what got overlooked, what I hear you saying is potentially, because earlier in segment 1, we talked about a shared image. What your vision looks like, what you are casting for the community, for what a Houston public school student, a graduate will look like, what they can count on. And in this case, in terms of you coming in June, school starts in August, the time or runway to establish that shared image of what an effective teacher looks like, what a performance interview might look like. And so that may have been an area that was overlooked.
For sure. I mean, we gave them questions for a performance interview and some videos, but that was not enough. They were trying to learn all kinds of the principals and APs, and HR was trying to learn all kinds of other things to get school started. There was still mid-level management, still tied to the old ways. I'll give you an example. We wanted every teacher who came to the job fair and got approved by the principal to walk out with a piece of paper that said, you have a job.
We called them golden tickets.
With this salary, pending at the bottom, this background check. But I mean, just to get that piece of paper into the hands of the teachers who the principals approved, it was like an act of Congress. I had to recarry it. I had to,
what do you think was preventing them? What was the barrier? I mean, part of me suspects that one was they didn't want to be the sole arbiter deciding who was going to work at their schools because they know that, well, I need to bring it to my teacher teams and they need to see if it's a good fit. And that's usually what sinks a school as well, because the good fit means that they get along with, that they'll want to hang out and be friends with the people on their team, as opposed to, are they an effective teacher who's going to do great for kids?
So half of it was the HR and half of it was the school, meaning HR was tied to status quo bias. The way we did it here, they had regulations, they had processes that they put in place. You can never hire somebody, you will appreciate the position control number. If the position control number is freed up, so a principal's trying to hire for a position that someone has resigned from, but their resignation hasn't gone through, or because or somebody that they have removed, because the HR provides 45 days for that teacher to go through what's known as a file review process. you can't hire for. I mean, it was all these bureaucratic rules. And I had to keep telling principals, there's 504, there's 600 vacancies.
And they say, Mike,
Yeah.
we want to believe you, but HR's been here a lot longer than
Yeah,
you
well,
have.
exactly.
We were taken over by TA. We know that you've been brought in to help us. We don't know how long you're going to be here. We better keep
Well,
listening to them.
That's absolutely right. And then so I
Having
brought-
worked in the
yeah,
Oakland Public Schools, Mike, I can tell you, I was a teacher and a principal there. I understand the metropolitan district sort of mindset.
Well, but so it was also capacity, leadership capacity, or the lack of in HR. It was the capacity of people who understand how to manage other people during times of change. And that all falls to me because I didn't train them, coach them well enough prior to making all these changes and requirements. We did a lot of other changes, but that's one area where it didn't go well at all.
Yeah.
We got to 0 vacancies, but so what?
Yeah.
We, at the end, I think, I kid this way. I mean, I think we went down to 7-Eleven and just got some people. We didn't really go down.
No, I got you.
But we were.
Yeah.
If they had a pulse on July 31st, we were hiring that person.
Oh, my word. Let me ask you, what did you learn about relationships throughout this experience? Because clearly either you were learning a lot about relationships or there were some new relationships forming. So what would you say was something that you learned about relationships?
I think there's always a status quo bias. And with regard to relationships, I think there was a certain amount of, I will escape notice and I'll just keep doing what I've always done. I think the superintendent is a takeover superintendent. He hasn't gotten my trust. I don't know what he knows.
Right.
And my relationships with HR and others, my colleagues, is a lot stronger. And my relationship with my executive director, my evaluator, is also much stronger and will protect me from. So I can do compliance, I can go through the motions, I can do things like that. And so I think that was part of it. And the onus was on me to try to show a couple of things that I knew, and I brought in people who knew what they were doing with regard to teachers and teacher quality and high performance culture. And then 2, we were building a system that would have a high performance culture, and that I was serious on some of the non-negotiables and things like that. Part of the relationship has to be professional, and it has to be when you are taking over a district with 274 autonomous schools that had failed pretty miserably, then the relationship has to be professional, and there has to be this hierarchy that someone has to make the decisions. And I don't.
When you said autonomous, I mean, do you mean literally like autonomous schools that they had their own boards and they?
No,
okay, not in
they
this.
had
Not
their
in
own
this.
boards. They had their own budgets, their own curriculum, their own decision making, their own way of operating.
And so they were really incredibly decentralized. I mean, they still were under the umbrella of Houston, or they were completely.
No, they were still under the umbrella, but they had instructional control.
Calendar?
No, the district did have a calendar.
Okay, because they relied on busing and nutrition services and those types of pieces. Wow. 200 and how many autonomous schools?
274. So I had to pull back that autonomy. And one of the things that I would say about systems, you have to be clear about who makes which decisions when. What is the decision making? What is the level of autonomy? And in my systems, autonomy has to be earned.
Yeah.
And I think all of that was just too fast in the summer.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my last question is, what would you have done differently, or what could you have done differently? And it sounds, I mean, I don't know, if you come in June, you have a glaring issue and you've got to resolve it, and you do it the very best you can with the intent of doing it better in the future. But was there something that you, looking back, what would you have done differently?
Yes, I would have done a few things differently. I would have introduced the performance, but not make it a mandatory thing, performance interview, because there wasn't enough time for them to learn, but just getting them to start thinking about. What I would have leaned into more heavily is the bureaucratic obstacles in HR. I would have hired a couple deputy chiefs, because the mid-level management areas is a problem in large systems. At that time, there were about 28,000 employees. And so big HR, lots of mid-level management that was used to operating a different way. I would have identified earlier, even before June, the key bureaucratic obstacles like the position control number problem and background check. And I would have identified that early and then scripted a little bit more. For example, if you go to a job fair today, we had one Saturday and then the Saturday before. A person can walk in, the performance interview's done right there. They can do it online before they get to us, or they can do it right there on the spot. They have to watch a video and about instruction and then comment on it. So it's already there. Take that out of the principal's hand. Background check station is right there. And we look at their certificate, their transcripts right there. It's a one-stop shop. We got rid of the bureaucracy. We have that piece of paper that says you have a job. We have the salaries post. I mean,
That's exciting.
now well-oiled. That's what I was hoping for. And we wouldn't have been able to do it as well, but we could have done a lot better had I scripted what I just told you. Had we scripted that already ahead of time, we could have made a lot of that happen.
So I think you've answered this last question, which is in the end, what was something that was good that came out of the situation? And that is that you built a better process moving forward.
No question. And the whole team learned from that. And now we have a really good process.
What advice would you give to an aspiring leader?
Yeah, there's all kinds.
I'll reframe it. What's one piece of advice?
Yeah, I was going to say, you're talking to an old person.
I know. I went, oh boy, oh boy.
Lots of things to tell the young whippersnappers.
Get off my lawn.
Exactly.
That's the advice I'd say.
Yeah, get to work early.
That's right.
Now, here's what I would say. Don't be afraid to be bold. Be bold or go home. Go big or go home is what I would say. And the reason I would say that now versus maybe 5-10 years ago as the number one thing is you used the word design. We have to redesign our systems. The world is moving fast, and most schools and school districts are what we said in the Army is OBE, overcome by events. That's a phrase you use when you made these plans and you're going along and you're tackling you have a good strategy and plan, but something happens and your plan is no longer viable. And so you have to shift quickly without going back to, you don't have time to go back to the drawing board and create a new strategic plan. You've got to shift right there in the moment because you are OBE, overcome by events. And right now, most districts are overcome by events. The future has moved fast. They haven't gotten their act together with regard to reading and math. And now there's not just reading and math, but there's year 2035 competencies. So we need leaders, aspiring leaders, to come in, think about the future, redesign the system, and be bold about it.
There you've had it. Our guest today was Mike Miles, a lifelong public servant, educator who's led major school systems, including his current role as the superintendent of Houston ISD in Houston, Texas. Mike, in the middle of our conversation, you talked about the Houston promise, but really what I think you were projecting here, or at least giving a roadmap, is really a promise that every district in the U.S. can absolutely follow. And that is to be really purposeful, intentional, and to build a really clear system so that all schools are, let's say A's and B's, but let's say A's. Thank you so much for your time. I really am grateful for it.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Anytime.
So we're back.
Yes.
What you opened with this reflection on system change and speed of transformation.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested in, I have a thought about it, but I want to hear what your thinking is specifically from the superintendent's point of view. I mean, obviously, I don't think of Columbia, the school district that you were superintendent of, as small in any way. But
No,
then
I mean,
compare it
obviously,
to
it's just not
Houston.
on the same side. I know, exactly. I mean, we went from 120 D and F campuses and 56 F campus. I'm like, already you're I mean, we had 36 campuses, so we were like, okay, got it. Yeah, it was fine, but it was, yeah. So that's interesting though, because I have always adopted this mindset of real change, enduring change takes time, that it's step by step, because the example I've given over and over is, I think the district I was leading, I think it was founded in 1860 something. So it was like just a few years after the Civil War. And, Missouri. Who was more likely than not leading that district and who was more likely than not incorporating and founding that district? And so they built systems, and those systems absolutely endured over time. And so you want to change a historically oppressive system, it doesn't happen like that. I mean, there are certain things you can stop doing. And at the same time, you're talking about shifting mindsets. You do this work every day all over the country about shifting mindsets. And so that's like having someone convert their beliefs, principles, and values. Not that everyone's racist because of that period of time. It is, though, there are certain nuggets, I think, that are embedded in our psyche. And so I guess what I'm saying is, if you want to change a system that has really performed poorly for some and some have excelled, that it doesn't change just rapidly. And yet Mike Miles has demonstrated that in some ways you can. That may be just an excuse. And so he says we've had the largest, fastest transformation of any large urban district in the history of Texas, probably the United States. And that the work that they've done was around organizational coherence, that they were really clear on what they were trying to achieve, and they were just unapologetic in going for it. And so, yeah, to me, it was a really interesting and I thought important conversation, particularly for those like me who might have been using change as an excuse, that the pace of change, it takes time. And maybe it doesn't always have to take so much time. You just need to have a mandate and a coalition of the willing to go make it happen.
I think that's true. I think he sort of said both things are true. He said that the real change that they'll see in Houston will be beyond him. So in saying that, to me, is, to your point, change is actually slow over time. A system change requires time for it to become a system. Otherwise, it's literally, I think he says at some point, system change, not programs. But they are programs in the beginning. They're programs or new initiatives or whatever you want to call it, a curriculum adoption, whatever, in the beginning, because they're not a part of the everyday thinking. They're not a part of the system in any way. And it takes time for people to get the vocabulary, to get used to it, et cetera. But it did make me think about, what are the things that cause disruptive change quickly? AI is doing that right now. It's causing disruptive change quickly, very quickly.
Well, the pandemic did that. I thought we would see a radically different schooling, the way we do school based on that. And it almost exemplified what we've said in the past around, when you agitate for change, the system will work aggressively to return to status quo. In so many ways it has. And now, to your point, AI is saying, no, that's actually not going to be possible. We're going to change you one more way. Not going to be
there. It makes me think of the coders. If we go back to the AI idea, and the coders maybe some coders losing their jobs because AI is doing the coding. That's happened before. There once was a time when there were typesetters.
Yeah.
Where's that job?
That's true. That's very funny. You know what I think, though? I think, in fact, in thinking about what Mike was saying, and that is that the needs for 2030 or 2035 are very much what many of us have been agitating for a long time, and have always just been, I don't know, almost like sort of tossed aside as, oh, those are soft skills and that's important, but we really got to do more important things with kids in school. And what he's saying is, actually, the need to redesign our curriculum should focus on critical thinking, empathy, team leadership, like human skills, because that's what AI can't do. And so he said in his quote, what is the human competitive advantage 5 years from now? What is our competitive advantage? And he says empathy, and he says working in teams and decision making. He says we want to prepare our kids for a different world and workplace. Can't just do CTE, for which I was like, oh, CTE. And he's like, it's not just CTE, and it's not just high school. Those are important, but they are not enough. And I was like, oh, as I re-listened in advance of our conversation, was like, yes. I mean, this is so exciting.
That the art of thinking core class at every
yeah. I just want to learn more about that. You want to go look at it and sit in?
Yeah, like it also made me think of, like,
I think he'd be pleased to invite you.
I'm like, there are a bunch of philosophy majors right now going, see, I told you, yelling from the sidelines that the art of thinking is worth spending some time on. I remember some friend majoring in philosophy, and I'm like, what are you going to do with that? Like, where does that go? And yet here we are.
And
I thought that was a really That's a bold choice. A bold choice to mandate in a district that large that every 10th grader has to take this course that applies to no college application, no requirement, but in our district we require it. I think that's really impressive. And that goes to the boldness of decision making that I think
I wanted to talk to you about that. You've said the word bold, and I feel like it's a perfect lead into, as we get closer to the end of our time today, I want to explore that word with you because he talks about making bold decisions.
Yeah. I mean, so in the work that we do, we really advocate for audacious goals. We don't talk about setting incremental goals with folks, with leaders. We talk about setting audacious goals, which usually means that they won't get met. This goes to your incremental change. When I say 100% literacy rate in my elementary school, I'm not going to meet that instantaneously. I'm going to fail, but you come closer, you make more growth shooting for something audacious than you do if I say, I want to increase literacy by 1.8%.
Yep.
And that's what this seems to me like. What happens when we mandate an art of thinking course across an entire 200 plus school system? Wow. That's amazing. I am so interested to see what I'd like to interview 12th grade students who took that course and are going on to how did that impact? Did the course impact?
That's another thing I imagine he'd be open to is having a focus group with kids as he's talking about redesigning and preparing kids for 5-10 years from now and thinking about what does that look like? Maybe that is what fast change can look like, is when you are actually really intentional about the kind of learning and the kind of thinking that kids get to do and then will continue to do as they become productive citizens in their communities. Or you're talking about Houston. So kids go all around the world from Houston. And so that impact, that impact. I was going to call it a virus model, but an infection model, but we've had enough of that. So
thank you.
Let's just spread the positive.
But this kind of bold decision making and or disruption in a traditional public educational system, I gotta say that he even says that I'm an old guy. I've got a lot of thoughts about what to do, what you should do, the advice I want to give to another leader. But I think he knows he's positioned in a way in which making bold choices is fine, because if he gets let go, that's okay for him. He's made a career. He's made a name for himself. I'm like, I think it makes me think of back to Dr. Rachel White's work on women in superintendencies, people of color in superintendencies, and the one shot they get. How bold should they be? How do they know? How do they measure? What's the best choice what's the place to be bold and what's the place that you don't, so that you can keep your job to be bold later?
It's interesting. Yeah. Part of me feels that his years of experience, his work in Dallas, his work in other areas, his work in diplomacy, his work as an Army Ranger have prepared him for this kind of important role that he's playing in one of the largest systems in our country. And it gives him the ability to be bold. I think he would maybe also say, without speaking for him, that for me, I'm not talking about the example you just gave with Rachel White, because I think you're absolutely right. If you're a leader of color, if you're a woman in leadership and you're early in your career, you're really trying to think about what meaningful changes can I make while maintaining my employment. So I totally think that. I was thinking to myself, though, I'm just a little bit behind Mike in terms of years of experience. And I would think that the example I gave of saying, I'm just not sure we can move that fast, he'd say, you've been overcome by events. Like you are allowing yourself to OBE, to be overcome by events. And don't let that be the excuse for achieving or pursuing the good, the right, the bold. And so anyway, I'm going to be listening to this. Yeah, please, you can end.
Can I end on one more thought with that? That overcome by events, I thought it touched me as a coach. I've had we're nearing the end of the year. We both know the cycle of school system calendars. You hit this point in April and May. We're talking about testing. We're talking about all of the end of the year events. I mean, my wife is leading the prom at the hospital, right? So she's going to be hosting the prom for hospitalized students. And it's a big event. It's a massive event. Some of the principals that I coach are canceling. They're like, I don't have time. I don't really have time for this. Can we find another date? And I know this. I know how this works. Of course, I have no problem. Not a problem at all. But I do want to put it out there and question that this could be the actual exact time that you take 45 minutes to slow down, get aligned with yourself, get aligned with your values so that you are not overwhelmed with events. Because there are plenty of events to be overwhelmed by. And so take the time to have a coach just say, remind you, are you on track? Is this what you said you wanted to do in terms of your beliefs and your values? Is it still aligned that way? And well, it helps clear things up. Even it gives you a moment to breathe, to not be running off to do bus duty for the 10 field trips that are happening for all the different grade levels all at once. All that stuff, I think, can make it hard to lead if you don't take a minute to have some time to reflect with someone else, and you'll be more effective and more human.
So much to think about from this episode. I know I'll be coming back to it. You've been listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. Jamie, I will see you next week.
I will see you next week. Thank you to you and Mike Miles today. That was great.